Welcome. We come to this night to honor the stories of the Jesus tradition that bring us this Good Friday. For generations, this has been a day to honor the depth of loss and challenge that confront our spiritual journeys, and the tragic violence and fear that happens when the voices of love are ignored and silenced. Tonight is a night for pondering one of the themes and images that come out of the story of Jesus' last day, when he speaks the words, "I thirst," as some of his last words. It gives us the chance to ponder those things for which this first century teacher thirsted for in the world, and for which we in our lives have great thirst. As we honor the tradition of this Good Friday, we also gather here as a community that meets here in this space. And we honor with respect the land and spirituality of the people who have traditionally called this land home for thousands of years. As people of treaty, all of us, we honor the heritage and gifts of the First Nations and Métis people with whom we together call this home. It is to this place, to this community, to this safe space, to this time, that we're invited to come. We are a people acquainted with drought. We know the thirst of stony land for moisture, for the renewal of snow and rain. We are a people who have experienced the dryness of despair. We know the thirst of our spirits for hope and healing. We are a people who have witnessed unspeakable violence with one another, with the creatures of the earth and our planet itself. And we long for peace and justice to flow unimpeded like a mighty river. We gather in our thirst for a more compassionate, sustainable, and fair world. We come to water our hope and nourish our commitment to resist and persist in living into the fullness of our sacred potential.
In a world of deep darkness, we thirst for light. In the darkness that lives within so many, in the struggle for health and hope, we thirst for light. In the darkness of the violence that we have witnessed even this week in our world. We thirst for the light of understanding and other ways to resolve our conflicts. Amid it all, we thirst for the light of hope, the light of truth, the light of love. From John's Gospel, an image and an interpretation of the death of Jesus, written very late in the 1st century or early in the 2nd century. Standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." And then he said to the disciple, "And here is your mother." And from that moment, the disciple took her into his own home. After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus received the wine, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. This is one of the images and interpretations of the death of Jesus that comes to us from writings late in the 1st century. May we find wisdom for our living. from the wisdom of a great elder, a poet who makes his home in Kentucky, Wendell Berry, from his collection of writings entitled Leavings. To save yourself heart whole in life, in death, go back. Upstream if you have to swim ashore and walk. Walk upstream along the bank of the Kentucky River, the bank of the Can Run, and step from stone to stone up Camp Branch, through the cut down, long time returning woods. Go back through the narrowing valleys to the waters of origin, the dry leaves, the bare wintering trees, the dead, the unreturning. Go from the corrupted nation to the ruining country. With the land again, make common cause. In loving it, be free. Diminished as it is, grant it your grief and care, whole in heart, in mind. Free, though you die or live. So late. Begin again. These words speak of the poet's long love of his land. We know what it is to be thirsty. We know what it is to live on a planet that has more than 70% of its surface as water. We know what it is to live in a body that's more than 60% water. Water, water everywhere, but not an endless supply to drink. With only 3.5% of Earth's waters being fresh and drinkable. And we are perennially thirsty creatures. We don't live long without meeting our need for water. So among the last words that John's Gospel has Jesus speak, express this truly basic and utterly believable need. I am thirsty, he says. In life, in death as in life, he was thirsty. Ironically, in many ways, it was his thirst that got him killed. A thirst for equality, for justice, for inclusion, a thirst for power to be shared, power with, not power over. A thirst for the poor to have more, for women and children to be valued, for enemies to be loved into friendship, for empires to collapse into some expression of commonwealth. Thirsty for what he called the kingdom of God, thirsty for what others have called the beloved community, or perhaps, as Terry Tempest Williams names it, the open space of democracy. His thirst wasn't about another place, another world. It was a thirst for another way of being in this place, in this world. And his thirst took him to the poor and the sick, to the diseased and the disabled, to those who were most disadvantaged for whatever reason by the way things were. It took him to the outsiders, who challenged his own prejudice and stretched his understanding of who he was and with whom he must cast his lot in life. And his thirst took him into confrontations with the political and religious leaders of his day and with the economic systems and the distorted rituals that robbed people of bread and of hope. He wasn't alone in his thirst. He placed his thirst in community with others who were also thirsty for a better world, thirsty for a more hopeful future. And with those, He inspired to do what they could to address the thirst of the most desperate members of their society. We are thirsty creatures, thirsty for acceptance, for compassion, for dignity, for friendship, for integrity, for wholeness, for meaning. We're thirsty for terror to end, for understanding to lead to tolerance and peace, for the healing of the wounds we've inflicted on one another, for righting the wrongs of our history. And our common thirst takes us to the ancient wells of deeply dug spiritual traditions. And it takes us to the fresh springs we're finding in places we never thought to look. Our thirst takes us to the wonders of the natural world and to the temples that we've built with our awe and our reverence. It leads us to create community with one another and to occupy our streets and the steps of our legislatures to protect what we thirst for. John's Gospel has Jesus not only say, "I thirst," but also, "It is finished." Whenever and however death comes, I suspect we all hope to feel that it's not unfinished, that it's not incomplete, or that it's not stolen from us or taken against our will, but that we have lived in such a way that we can feel that life is complete and finished, though we long to savor it longer. I don't hear this as a pronouncement of defeat or despair. It's not like, "I am so done here." It's an acknowledgement of having done one's part. And then entrusting the future to those who continue or who come after us. Between our birth and our death, our lives are one long conversation with our thirst. A thirst that invites us to dig a new well, to discover a new spring, to revisit or redig the wells that have watered generations before us, to respect the dry stream and the dry well that no longer refresh, though it may have quenched the thirst of those who traveled before us. To know that we are one with the waters that fall in rain and in tears. That we live in a watery world and a watery world lives in us, and we are perennially thirsty because we are spiritual beings in a physical and human experience. Those who walked out of the waters to enter a dry land. And life invites us to drink deeply, to find what enlivens us, what unites us, what sustains us, what washes us into newness, what is precious and finite and needs our protection. What's meant for all of us, not just some of us. What is gift and resource, not a commodity to be seized and sold. What comes to us as gift and is meant to be the inheritance of generations that will come after us. The stories we remember this day invite us beyond the image of one who is dying of thirst. They invite us to be inspired and enlivened by those who have taught us how to live by thirst, how to live consciously in relationship with the deep well of being, how to live in solidarity and sustainably with this watery home and all who depend on its health for theirs. As the poet said, it's time to go back upstream, to go back through the narrow valleys to the waters of origin, to make common cause with all that sustains life, and to begin again. Our thirst invites us to remember who we are, how it is that we are, on what we depend, to remember where we come from, to remember our lives in water, in the primal waters of beginning, in the warm waters of the womb, and to protect what we have endangered, to free what has been taken captive, to live by our thirst for what is good, for what is good for the whole, and therefore for what is good for the soul. This is our time to pause and consider where our thirst invites us to go, what our thirst calls forth in us, and where it is that we have found that which waters our hope. This is our time to be with our thirst.
Let's focus our hearts and join together with our words of prayer. As day becomes night, we bring our prayers for a weary earth, an earth worn weary by negligence and neglect, by waste and disrespect. Amid the pain of a wounded planet and a warring world, we reach out with broken hearts to restore right relationship. Our spirits long for rain as upon dry land. Some are parched by the demands of life. Others are drowning in despair. We remember those in need of still waters of comfort, those whose inner well has run dry, those navigating the cross currents of change. May we be the buoyancy of love for those who need it most. We long for justice to flow like water and integrity to be our unfailing stream. In the quiet of this night, we are mindful of our debt to life, to love, to all that has gone before us. In the strength of our hope, we seek to be immersed in the possibilities for peace, justice, and compassion for all. In the name of love, we pray with one another. Amen. A reading of a poem by Denis Levertov entitled The Fountain. Don't say there is no water to solace the dryness at our hearts. I have seen the fountain springing out of the rock wall and you drinking there. And I too, before your eyes, found footholds and climbed to drink the cool water. The woman of that place, shading her eyes, frowned as she watched, but not because she grudged the water, only because she was waiting to see that we drank our fill and were refreshed. Don't say there is no water. That fountain is there among its scalloped green and gray stones. It is still there and always there, with its quiet song and strange power to spring in us, up and out through the rock. These words speak of the poet's deep hope. May we find wisdom for our living. Don't say there is no water. It is still and always there to spring in us. Water is springing in us even now, even amidst the dry places of thirst, the dryness of yearning, of parched spirits, and quiet wondering. And so we affirm together the presence of this sacred connection and acknowledge the places our thirst calls us to be. And so we recognize the need for all peoples and creatures to have safe and clean water. We lament that some communities, even in this prosperous nation, still don't have a safe glass of water to drink. This is where we thirst for clean water for all. We commit to the sustainable and responsible use of the precious resource of clean and safe water. We will stand up to those who seek to take it and sell water as a means of profit, while those who desperately need it go without. We will live as simply as we're able and commit to lives and choices that will not pollute and damage our planet's water for others and for generations. We recognize injustice and the playing out of those who have and those who have not. We experience the imbalance of power and it being used as a weapon of control. We witness the desert of policies and programs that continue to keep the status quo and inhibit a just and fair economy. This is where we thirst for equity. We commit to the waters of justice. We commit to live lives that move beyond charity and toward equity in relationships. We will speak wisdom to the unjust use of power, and as much as we are able, act for the greater good. Where extreme views have corrupted common sense, where religion has become a weapon instead of a path toward awareness and peace, where hatred and single-mindedness have shut the possibility of dialogue, diversity, and multiple understandings, where rigidity and idealism has led to violence, destruction, fear, and oppression. This is where we thirst for understanding. We commit to speaking moderately and openly in the extreme views. We will engage others with openness, with mutual respect, and with love. We will be part of spiritual dialogue and communities that seek to help, not harm. We will endeavor to bring peace and the positive values of compassion and respect within our relationships and our communities. Where human connection and intimacy are lacking, despite our constant digital connections, where our homes and neighborhoods have become prisons of isolation, where depression and social pressure bring meaninglessness and addictions, where a desire to belong calls upon each of us This is where we thirst for community. We commit to creating communities that support one another. We will open our circles of friends and family to those who are searching for love and connection. We will continue seeking those places where we connect with each other. Don't say there is no water. It is still there. It is always there, bringing moisture to the dryness, bringing hope to despair, bringing water to our parched spirits. In our living, the water within us will flow. And as we go in this night, we go with our hopes of water. Water that might go. Water that might flow. Water that we might find welling up in us and in our spirits to overflow onto the land, into the lives of those we encounter. And so we go in the spirit of that water to take our spirits and let them be transformed over the course of time. From now into the night, into the days ahead. May we go in that hope for peace, for justice, for water to flow.